The 4.8 Genshin livestream occurred just a few days ago, and with it came some massive quality of life improvements for the overall daily grind for the game. Things like long-term encounter points, the ability to hide UI, and my favorite change, bosses now respawn after 10 seconds instead of an entire 5 minutes. Thank the Archons. All of these are great changes and a continuing trend of Genshin Impact to improve many aspects of the game. We've seen similar additions in the past few updates, and I believe this is a net positive thing for the game, especially since there's so much more competition now in the gacha space. So, although Genshin continues to make strides towards an even more optimized and polished game, will it be enough to bring back players who have already switched to other gacha games, or even retain the players it still has? It's no secret that the high-budget gacha game genre is heating up significantly. The first bit of pressure Genshin saw was back in 2023 when two major events happened just around the same time, that being the first closed beta test for WutheringWaves and the release of honkaistarrail by WuWa. Obviously, with WuWa producing starrail, any players it stole were still giving their money to the same company, but with WutheringWaves taking its first step into the public spotlight, previous calls to action about improving the daily grind and progression within Genshin grew exponentially, as now players had a way to protest more so than just quitting the game, but by giving a direct competitor their time, attention, and money. Somewhere along the developer pipeline at WuWa, those in charge of making decisions for the future of Genshin were putting much more emphasis, time, and money into making the game have a smoother experience. Our first tangible piece of evidence to indicate that these changes would begin being made and implemented in-game was back in June 2023 with a developer discussion speaking about issues regarding the map. With the release of Sumeru, underground locations became a massive part of exploration, but at the time, the map was just a single layered PNG, so you were essentially blind navigating down there unless you went through the effort of either memorizing the layout underneath or manually mapping it out digitally or physically. Now, the developers themselves were addressing the problem, and later in version 4.0, they graced us with the final product. The next time this happened was a small update in August that same year, where they announced an increase to the amount of artifacts you could hold from 1500 to 1800, as well as being able to destroy 4-star artifacts. But the next massive announcement was around a month later in September, when it was confirmed an overhaul of the commission system as a whole by adding encounter points. While in no way was this system perfect, as shown by how it was just recently updated again, it was game-changing for the time, allowing players with different interests in the game to have more freedom when completing and collecting the rewards that are highly incentivized to get every single day. Following through on their word, WuWa released these changes in the version 4.1 update soon after the post. Following the commission's update, the next big change was in late October, where it was announced that trounce domains could now be challenged without completing the prerequisite quests, and you can now unlock and accept story quests separately, meaning you won't have those random encounters all over the world after unlocking characters' story quests. These changes were implemented in the 4.2 update. Basically, from here on out, there are developer posts every 4 to 6 weeks outlining the new quality of life changes coming to the game, which is great for two reasons. Of course, obviously, quality of life changes are a good thing, but more importantly, an actual line of communication from the developers is not something the player base had beforehand, and was extremely refreshing. Next, we had artifact management and enhancement screen optimizations, one-click expeditions, and the character reload spot update in 4.3, fast-equip artifacts, massive Serenity Pod optimizations for the 3 players still using it to actually build, increasing number of party compositions, test run optimizations, and one of the absolute biggest changes for myself personally, borderless full screen, all in version 4.4. The character training guide system and showing materials required for the next upgrade in talents for 4.5, overhauling how the treasure compass works, a ton of new profile pictures related to world quests, and map settings overhaul in 4.6. Perhaps the biggest change out of anything Genshin has ever updated, but increasing the resin cap from 160 to 200. This is like genuinely lifestyle routine changing, as well as increasing friend count and enhancement materials cap in 4.7. And finally, we're at the present day with the 4.8 updates I mentioned at the beginning of this video. This is a massive list of changes, especially for all of it to be done in just a single year, but what is even more impressive is when you compare the amount of changes after 4.0 to before. It's completely night and day. We as a community might have received a single patch and update 4 worth of quality of life changes in the entirety of 1.0 to 3.8 if we're being generous. So undoubtedly, these updates have changed the game for the better in so many different ways. but the real question is whether they've brought back players that left or even managed to keep existing players from leaving to another newly releasing game. To help answer this question, let's take a look at this chart. These massive spikes are from when 1. The game released, and the following are every major release patch after. Unfortunately, what's being shown here is Genshin, even being past the honeymoon phase after it first released, is continuing to be less prominent in the general internet. But this doesn't prove that other games releasing had a direct correlation with the general diminishing of Genshin's player base. Let's try adding all the major gacha game releases after Genshin. Looking at all the other games, their search results tend to make sense, peaking its highest at first released. But what's interesting is that if you didn't already know in the timeline when these games released, you wouldn't be able to pinpoint where, if at all, these games took away from Genshin's market share. A conclusion based solely off this data would suggest that other gacha titles had little to no impact in the short-term health and viability to Genshin's relevancy, which would suggest several things. 1. In the early stages, the release of an alternative game has not directly impacted the longevity of Genshin. And 2. Any players that did leave made the decision to either leave the gacha community entirely or decided to play multiple titles at the same time. This last bit here is the most important, as it gives us the answer we are looking for when trying to answer this question. Most gacha players that were introduced to the genre by Genshin Impact, myself included, instead of fully quitting, decided to play 2 or even multiple at the same time. It's also important to note that despite all of the quality of life updates in 4.0 and onwards, the chart seems to show Genshin continuing its normal downwards trajectory, leading me to my final conclusion of that being, it's too late for Genshin. But it's not all doom and gloom. I know a lot of you watch my honkaistarrail content, and if we remove all of the other charts here and just leave starrail by itself, you'll notice something peculiar. After its initial peak and drop off, it's actually trending slightly upwards. The fact that it manages to maintain its relevancy at all is a shock, but to trend upwards on average is insane. My guess is that word of mouth from other gacha game players, as well as just how accessible it is on mobile, is leading to this growth, rather than decline in relevancy. Although I should note that Zenless Zone Zero and WutheringWaves have not yet been out long enough for us to make a definitive conclusion on whether or not those games will affect Genshin and starrail, but I'm sure in around a year's time or so, I will make a follow-up video looking into what effect these new games had on our favorite waifu collecting simulators. That's gonna be it for me today. Covered a bit of a different topic than I normally do, so let me know what you thought of it. Like the video and make sure to subscribe for more unique content. I'm really excited about the sudden influx of viewers checking out what I make, so it continues to motivate me to do better and better. If you'd like to get to know me more personally, I do have a Discord with around 150 others that would love to have you. Anyways, that's it for now. See you all next time. Sir Epic out.